E-L-O-E-J, a little aloha in our day. Spread a little aloha around the world at breakfast with Bob.
Thank you, Poncho Man. Welcome back, everybody. Breakfast with Bob, not quite Kona edition. My name is Bob Babbitt. We are brought to you by Hoka One One, Master Spas, Clash Endurance, UCAN Hyper Ice, Premium Plus Sports, and Form Smart Swim Goggles, along with our Challenged Athletes Foundation. During COVID, we sent out 3,038 grants, totaling $5.1 million to keep challenged athletes in the game of life through sport. This week, we get to chat with a gentleman who has won the XTERRA World Championships twice, coming off of 5th place at Ironman South Africa. Mr. Bradley Weiss joins us. How you doing, Bradley?
Yeah, really well. It's summer in Africa, so we have some awesome weather at the moment. Just came off my first Ironman race, went pretty well. So no, very positive, and going into XTERRA World Championships this coming weekend. It's been 2 years since XTERRA World, so yeah, really looking forward to getting back to the Big Island.
So you've basically been defending champion for 2 years.
Yeah, it's been great. If they just keep this going, I'll be the longest standing defending champion of all time.
I love that is awesome. So take me back growing up in South Africa. What were your sports early on, and how quickly did you find the sport of triathlon?
Yeah, so here in South Africa, it's quite popular to sort of play the more traditional team sports of rugby and cricket, and that's what I did growing up. And I played that through until the end of high school. And then going into my university days, I was sort of looking for a different kind of sporting challenge. And my father actually entered us into a triathlon, which none of us prepared for, myself, my two brothers and him. And we went out, did this race, and I really enjoyed it. The triathlon community were just so welcoming and supportive. And yeah, I was pretty captivated from the very first one. And it went pretty well. I managed to beat my brother, so that was good enough and gave me enough reason to keep pushing on. And yeah, one thing led to another, and I really got just gripped by the sport and the entire triathlon community and the lifestyle that it offers. And yeah, that was back in 2012, I believe. Actually, no, it would have been a little bit earlier, 2010, somewhere around there. And yeah, I never looked back. That's been my sport ever since.
So you got into the sport, you were what, 19 years old when you got into it?
Yeah, I was 19 years old, so first year of university here in South Africa. It was a very late start. I'd never spent any time in a swimming pool. It was all very foreign to me, and I hadn't really even done any endurance sports. Rugby is obviously a more sort of short, high-end explosive, similar to American football, where you spend a lot of time in the gym getting strong, getting explosive, and it's a full-on contact sport. So it's a very different sort of physiological requirements for that sport. So shifting over to triathlon was definitely a big change for me, and from like a training point of view. But I thoroughly enjoyed it, and it was a very different sporting challenge. And yeah, definitely it was enough to get me out of bed in the morning and keep pushing on.
So you win the World Under-23 Cross Triathlon Championship 2012. So you get into it in 10 by 12. You're already you're already a world champion. Had you dabbled in both road and off-road at that point, or was it primarily the dirt?
So because I was racing as an age grouper, I raced over the Olympic distance non-drafting format for the first couple of years of my triathlon career, but obviously just racing as an amateur. I was still studying at university. I was studying an accounting degree, so it was pretty demanding, many hours at university. So I was sleeping through classes because I was awake at 4 a.m. and swimming with the university students. So it was I was definitely burning the candle at both ends there. And then leaving university, Dan Hugo is a local South African who was racing on the XTERRA circuit at the time. And he was gracious enough. He was coming back from an injury, and he invited me to come and do some training with him. And I had done a couple of the off-road events, but not that many up until that point. And he kind of, I guess it really introduced me to the professional side of XTERRA racing. And from there, I really committed to off-road. Because I did not have that swimming background, ITU was not really an option at the time for me. The swimming was just the level was far too fast. So I couldn't quite bridge that gap, but I felt that my competence across all three sports was good enough to have a crack. And leaving university, decided in my first year out of university that I would go full time and see how it went. Hopped on a plane with Dan and sort of used my entire savings to get overseas and do my first race, and sort of used those prize winnings to pay to get to the next one. And so it went. And luckily enough, I never had any disasters along the way. And I raced professionally off-road for the next 6 or 7 years before switching back to on-road racing.
But that's so interesting, because another South African, Conrad Stoltz, from way back in the day, I was covering Conrad when he first came over here. He was like borrowing bikes from people to do the races before, to build up his reputation, to basically build a career. And you sort of did the same thing.
Those guys really led the way and showed that it was possible, for South Africans. Even we're very distant and far removed from the rest of the world, especially the triathlon world. So they really paved the way for us and allowed us sort of the hope and allowed us to dream a little bit bigger, and just proof of concept, right? That we could, if we played our cards correctly, have a pretty successful professional career.
What's fascinating to me, it's like if someone from the U.S. decides, or if someone decides to come to the U.S. to race, and you're from South Africa, it's not like, oh, I'll go there for the weekend and come home. I mean, you got to commit. You're there for basically 3, 4, 5 months at least and that's hard. You leave your family, you leave your friends. Was that a struggle for you when you first came over?
I mean, in the beginning, it's super exciting, right? Like, I was traveling and I couldn't wait to leave and go and, test myself against the best around the world. In 2012, when I won my first under 23 world title, the race was in Alabama, Pelham, Alabama. It was sort of doubled up as the XTERRA race there. But because, as you say, it's such a long travel, I just coupled it with a few other events. So I was in the US for about 3 or 4 months the first time round. I loved it. I probably spent all my pennies and didn't really make that much money back. But I think it's really what you have to do to test, to improve, right? You can't stay here locally and expect to bridge the gap and then just travel out for a world championships or something like that. You need to race these guys week in, week out. It's definitely the Europeans and the Americans really have a massive advantage over us there, because just the level of competition and the accessibility of events is way higher.
When you look back, was there one race where you realized, okay, I can compete with these guys? Because you're going against the best in the world pretty much every weekend.
Yeah, from an off-road perspective, I think even winning the under 23 world title was still, it almost felt a little bit like an age group race. It wasn't like the U23 ITU events we see. It was a little bit more spread out. So while it was a great feather in my cap, it wasn't really the race that set it all up. The following year in 2013, I then went to Asia and I had a few decent results there, got on the podium, and started making a little bit of money back. And that was really the kind of the starting point of it. And then managed to win my first South African title. I believe it was 2014.
Okay.
And we had a really big South African, the XTERRA South Africa event. It's about half an hour away from where I live here in Stellenbosch. And that event really set me up. It allowed me just to have a lot more confidence, because I was racing against the likes of Conrad Stoltz and Dan Hugo and Richard Murray. It's really it was a super strong field at the time. So if you could compete against them, you knew you were heading in the right direction.
So when I look at 2017, where you win the XTERRA European Off-Road Championships, and then you also win your first XTERRA World Championship, that's a pretty damn special year. Was there something leading into that year that led to that type of success, or was it just every year you were just getting a little better?
Yeah, I went to XTERRA World Championships for the first time in 2014 and had a pretty good result. I was finished, I think, just outside the top 10, but had a big crash on the bike, and that sort of really set me back. And then I skipped the event in 2015. And at that point, I promised myself, if I'm going to do this professionally, then I need to commit and really, if I want to call myself a professional XTERRA athlete, I need to be at the World Championships every year, despite it being a massive travel. And then I made the commitment to go out to Boulder in 2017. I spent a lot of time racing in Europe and was able to win the European championship. So that gave me a lot of confidence and momentum. But then the big change was heading out to Boulder, Colorado, going up to altitude and doing a very, very specific block of training leading into that event. And I'd raced there 3 times by that point. So I knew what the race demanded. I knew what preparation required. And had some really good training partners in Boulder. So it just really lined up nicely to win my first world title. And that certainly was sort of the catalyst to really grow from there. And I got a lot of confidence from that event for sure, or from that year of racing.
So when I look at the variety, and explain to me the difference between XTERRA and the World Cross. Because I think a lot of people don't know that much about World Cross.
Yeah, so the ITU have started to dabble in the off-road triathlon scene. So the events that the ITU, the International Triathlon Union, that they host themselves, that is the cross triathlon events that we see around the world. So they have an ITU Cross Triathlon World Championships, that even have an ITU World Championship event, but they have very few select races. And then the XTERRA is obviously a separate private organization similar to Ironman, who host their own events and their own world championships. So it's just 2 different entities. The races themselves are very similar. It's a 1.5 kilometer swim. It's a mountain bike on varying terrain, just depending on what the area offers. We obviously like it to be as technical as possible, and they try and use the local trail systems, and then followed by that ranges from 25 to 35 kilometers, depending on the race and where it's being hosted, and then about a 10-kilometer trail run. So the distances and the style of race is very similar. It's just different organizations putting them on.
Got it. And that balancing XTERRA racing and road, and I look at 2019, you don't just win XTERRA World Championships, 2nd at Augusta 70.3, 9th at 70.3 Worlds in Nice, where you ran a 1:12:43. When you start running 1:10, 1:11, 1:12 half marathons, that's cooking. Then you win South Africa 70.3, you win Taiwan 70.3. That's a year where that's a big balance. And it's one thing to travel with a mountain bike, but now you're traveling with, you need a freaking Sherpa where you're going. So you've got to have your tri bike. You probably have a road bike to train. I mean, how do you balance all of that?
Yeah, it became a little bit ridiculous at times. So after 2017, when I won XTERRA World Champs for the first time, I decided that I wanted to try and do a little bit of more on-road racing. And because I'd come from that age group non-drafting scene, it was always like really captivating. And I followed Ironman events throughout my career, and I loved watching Kona, and it's sort of the holy grail of our sport. So I've always held it in very high regard, and thought, I wonder how I would fare against them. I mean, we're still just doing swim, bike, run, although it being off-road. It's similar physiological endurance requirements for both events. So I thought, it must translate. Some of it must translate across. So got myself a TT bike and went and did a few half Ironman races in 2018. And it was sort of mixed results. But in 2019, I really sort of hit my stride and took it a little bit more seriously. Invested in some smarter coaches, and got a specific cycling coach on board who made a massive difference, Mike Postumus, based out at the Sports Science Institute in Cape Town, and just attacked my training from a much more scientific point of view. Obviously dialing in aerodynamics, all that goes along with non-drafting 70.3 racing. It took a while to learn, but once I figured it out, my body is actually quite well adapted and suited to 70.3 racing. And I'm a very strong runner. That's definitely my strength of the 3. So I always knew that I had a good, a fast half marathon in me. I mean, they're getting ridiculous now. You have to, run sub 110. I ran sub 110 twice this year, and one of them I got second in the event. It was like, man, it's really becoming crazy. 5 years ago, nobody could run sub 110. It was unheard of. So level of the sport is really just crazy. It just keeps jumping. You think you've sort of hit the ceiling, and then somebody else comes out the following weekend and just completely sort of rewrites the record books, and you start from scratch again. But Yeah, the translation from XTERRA to on-road racing was actually pretty good and easier than I thought. I did train with a slightly higher volume than most XTERRA athletes, obviously including a lot of high intensity work on the mountain bike.
Yeah.
But that translated really well. I sort of had this range, this engine that I could rev really high, but I didn't really have the endurance that I needed for the 70.3 to begin with.
Yeah.
So maintaining that range that I had from XTERRA and then just building the engine just gave me, it seemed like a little bit of a competitive advantage over the guys who were just focusing on 70.3, and specifically against the guys who were doing Ironman racing. It seemed like they just had this one gear, and if you just attacked and just slightly raised it, they didn't have the ability to go with you. So I think they complemented each other quite nicely. But these days, with the amount of ITU athletes coming into Ironman, I don't really have that competitive advantage anymore. It's it's kind of starting from scratch, and yeah.
Well, it's interesting because it's exactly right. It's steady state. If you're sort of an Ironman or 70.3 guy, you're coming from ITU or you're coming from XTERRA. There's accelerations, there's constant change in terrain. So you've got to change positions. You've got to attack at certain points. It is a different game. So you did your first Ironman just last week, Ironman South Africa, and they shortened the swim. But you got fifth, 428 bike, 249.31 marathon, 744. It's so funny that, like you said, a number of years ago, you go 744, you're the king of the world, right?
Yeah. Now you go your debut, and I mean, Christian did his debut the same day and broke the world record. He went about 27 minutes.
21. Yeah. You're like, wait a second. What am I, chopped liver here? I went 740 something, my first ever race. And I'm guessing, because it sounds like that you were, like you said before we got on, that you'd never really hit that wall during that race. So you were, I'm sure, taking in food and doing it, sort of monitoring where you were at. So I look at that 249 marathon, and I'm guessing that you can go a lot faster than that.
Yeah, for sure. I think there was a lot of learning curves. And I mean, just coming back to our previous conversation, like saying that the Ironman racing is steady state, it's really not. Like, it was incredibly surgy, and at times you're riding well above sort of your 70.3 threshold speed, even though we were in an Ironman. And I was like, wow, this is really fast,
Wow. So there was a lot of surging going on.
Yeah.
Even early.
Because of the shortened swim, we had the situation that everybody was really close together.
Oh, that's right.
We were hoping to have a bit of a bigger gap over the likes of Sebastian Kienle and Rasmus Svenningsson. These guys are just like really, really strong cyclists. So if you have a 5-minute buffer over them, it takes them until about 130 kilometers to catch you on the bike. And then they only have they have a little bit less in the tank to start with, but then they also have less time to work with. They only have maybe 40 or 50 kilometers left on the bike. So they can't get these big leads that they were able to put over me in South Africa, because they caught our group at 60 kilometers into the ride. They still had 120 Ks to work with, and they were relatively fresh because of the shortened swim. So
shortened swim, yeah.
It was a little bit of like worst case scenario for me. And the road surfaces in Port Elizabeth are really brutal. It's not the nice, smooth, fast roads of Hawaii or the US. So it was pretty tough going, especially for me at 134 pounds or whatever it is. And I don't weigh a whole lot. So having really, really strong winds, enough to get the swim canceled. So you can imagine how strong the winds were blowing. And then my first 180 kilometer, I was up against it for sure. But at the same time, I think there's so many positives to take out of it. I felt like from a nutrition standpoint, I nailed that element. I didn't feel like I had any significant blow-ups or lows. If I have any criticism, I went out a little bit too hard on the marathon. I think I went through the half at about 118, which felt like surprisingly slow to me. I was like, oh man, I need to push on a bit here. But my coaches had told, my running coach, Ernie Grin, had told me, like, you're not allowed to run faster than 345, 350. And I was already averaging 330 at that point. So I was like, man, I'm really going way faster than I'm supposed to here. Went through the half in 118 and thought, oh man, this Ironman thing is not that difficult. I'll easily go sub 240 here. There's no worries. I only have to do a 122 half. And yeah, I kind of hit the wall at 30 Ks, not hit the wall, just like this deep seated pain that I've never experienced before, that, you know, everybody talks about and obviously warned me going into the event, but until you experience it, I just had to learn for myself, I guess. So I think if I just paced it a little bit better, maybe gone through the half in 120 or 121, I could have run, you know, 245 or 246, somewhere around where Maurice and Sebi ran. I think that would have been within reason and certainly within my ability. And again, it's my first one. We only used about 3 weeks of training into it. So I feel like there's a lot of learning I can still take on. And trying to race an XTERRA now in 2 weeks' time is going to be an interesting undertaking, but I'm very glad I did it.
Well, and you're defending, it's not like you're just racing an XTERRA, you're defending your title. You want to become a 3-time champion there.
That's the goal.
I love it. So how did you take a couple of days completely off just to let your body recover a little bit before getting the mountain bike out and getting back at it?
Yeah, well, the mountain bike's out already, and I've done 2 sessions this week already on it. Not interval sessions, of course, just spinning the legs over. And I was incredibly sore for the first 48 hours. Like really, like could barely get out of bed and thought, oh man, this is going to be a nightmare. But yeah, the body sort of held together better than I expected, and slowly but surely eased up, and actually feeling surprisingly good today already. And I've already done some quality in the pool, so. No, I think all being equal, I should be at least ready to race. Whether I'll be ready to, you know, really get the engine revving as high as I need to for the XTERRA World Championships. It's just the intensity level is really, really high. I know I've got a really like strong engine now, and my aerobic base is massive. But whether I have the ability to go with those surges will be interesting.
So they only had 2 spots at Ironman South Africa for Kona. So you didn't get a Kona spot. So is that something that you'll try to do early in 2022?
I mean, I'm not desperate to, I would love to race in Kona at some point. And if it works out, I'll do it, but I'm not going to go chasing it. You know, like if you look at what Lionel did this year, like really made that decision, and that was it. That was the A and B all. He was just making sure he qualified for Kona. And I don't really want to take that approach of it. I still feel like I've got a lot of learning to do, even in the 70.3 space. This is the first year I've managed to dip under that 110 bar. And I feel like there's not many guys who can do that in 70.3 racing. So if I play my cards correctly, you know, I could potentially get like a top 5 at 70.3 worlds, or maybe even a bit higher. So I'd love to sort of, develop as much as I can on the 70.3 front. And at the same time, obviously, I will definitely do another full Ironman event next year. We haven't settled on the exact date of that. Ironman South Africa is again in April. So potentially I'll race that event again. It's a month before Ironman World Championships in St. George. So it'll probably make for a slightly softer field.
So that way you would be able to qualify for
potentially, that'll be an easier qualification. And it's like, you know, an hour flight from my house. It makes a lot of sense from that point of view as well.
And that gives you plenty of time, because your season is going to be backloaded with XTERRA Worlds and with 70.3 Worlds at St. George, exactly. Right? So
yeah, so I think it'll work quite nicely to just work on that base training in the beginning of the year and go out and race an Ironman to start the season almost. There's not a lot of racing up front. Most of it seems to be pushed, especially in Europe, is sort of middle of the year, and then the US is more back end. So,
right.
But yeah, we're still waiting on the announcements of a few events to come out, and I'll make my decision probably early next year.
Love it. Well, Bradley, such a pleasure to get to chat with you. I've been following you for a long time. I'm like, you know, we've never had a conversation. Good luck at XTERRA Worlds. Hopefully you'll get your 3rd title there.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on, Bob. It was awesome, and it's a big pleasure to chat with you. I mean, I've been following you and your shows for as long as I can remember. So thank you so much for having me on. And hopefully we can do this again after I win my 3rd XTERRA World title.
I would love it. Bradley Weiss has been our guest again. Breakfast with Bob, not quite Kona edition. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. We'll catch you next time. See ya.
Ciao.